Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Ranking, the best Big Ten wide receiver rooms heading into 2025. And really interesting conversation to get into. And as you start building these rankings out, you start to realize that the injection of teams like Oregon, the injections of teams like USC into this conference has massively enhanced the wide receiver play in the Big Ten Conference. I'm a lifelong Michigan fan. I've watched a lot of Big Ten football in my days. Normally, the only team that consistently has good wide receiver play in the Big Ten was Ohio State. With Oregon and USC coming to the table, those are programs that are consistently putting out solid wide receivers into the NFL draft. I'm fired up to get into these rankings. A lot of different ways you could go, especially towards the bottom half of these. I'm going to give my top five. Best thing about doing this, please let it fly in the comment section. There will be some hot takes involved in these rankings. Would love to hear how y'all are feeling about them. And if you got a hot take yourself, please let it rip in the comment section. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We're doing offensive lines next, which I know is going to lead to a lot of discussion amongst the Big Ten fans. Without further ado, let's get into it. Number one, Ohio State. This one's pretty straightforward. Now, one of the frustrating narratives that I've seen around this Ohio State wide receiver room is it's just Jeremiah Smith. I'm not really sure how that idea got started, but I can assure you that it's not just Jeremiah Smith. And heck, even if it was just Jeremiah Smith and a bunch of me's out there, you're probably still talking about one of the better wide receiver rooms in this conference. Jeremiah Smith's the best wide receiver. He's the best football player that we see in the country heading into 2025. The thing that stands out to me is the amount of depth in this room. Carnell Tate, you could argue, is a top 10 wide receiver in the country going into 2025. Now, it's not necessarily because of the production that he has, although he caught for over 700 yards. I mean, he was in a wide receiver room with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Buka, was kind of that wide receiver three in this offense going into 2025, kind of clearly in my mind being that wide receiver too. You're probably going to see both Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate comfortably go for 1,000 yards in the 2025 year. And, Carnell Tate might not be as freaky in terms of the athletic profile that Jeremiah Smith has. This kid is one of the more polished wide receivers that you see in the country, which you kind of begin to expect with what Brian Hartline's doing in Columbus. Knows how to create separation, has every route in the route tree he can run. He can thrive over the middle of the field. He can work vertically. He gives you some juice after the catch. My favorite part about his game is the tempo. I mean, he knows how to, hey, when it's man coverage, I can go win and create separation. When I'm seeing zone coverage, I can find the soft spots and be presentable to the quarterback. There ain't many wide receivers that I think understand the sport and the position like Carnell Tate does. Then you look at Brandon Inniss, and here's the conversation that I think a lot of Ohio State fans are having is what's the wide receiver trio that we see most? And I think the expectation is Brandon Inniss kind of taking over for a guy like Emeka Buka in the slot. You could make the argument that Mylan Graham might be the third best wide receiver in this room. And what you could do, because Jeremiah Smith is such a freak, hey, Jeremiah Smith can operate out of the slot. And I see Brian Hartline trying to get guys like Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, and Mylan Graham all on the field at the same time. And maybe the same conversation goes for a guy like Quincy Porter, who is generating a lot of buzz as a freshman going into 2025. It's not just Jeremiah Smith. It's not just Carnell Tate. It is a very deep wide receiver room that is full of NFL talent and a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things, which makes it so easy for Brian Hartline to get all of these good wide receivers on the field at the same time. Then to cap it all off, you got Max Clare at tight end, who is one of, if not the best tight ends that you see in the country going into 2025. Number two, this one was between Oregon and USC. Now, I'll start with this. I think USC might have the better wide receiver duo between Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, but I'm going to give Oregon the nod as the number two wide receiver room in this conference just because of the depth. Now, I want to talk first about Evan Stewart, who I think has the ability to be a top 50 pick in the NFL draft. And I think with Dante Moore coming in and taking over this offense, I think you're going to see a little bit more of Evan Stewart in 2025. You look at his game, it felt like at times in 2024 they were trying to fit Evan Stewart into an offense that didn't always fit his skill set. Like you look at Evan Stewart, he is a track and field guy from high school, really good ball skills working vertically down the field. I think he's one of the better wide receivers working vertically down the field that you see in the country. Now, with Dylan Gabriel's skill set and with a guy like Tez Johnson, you saw Will Stein kind of build an offense that was, it didn't really attack vertically down the field all that much. And so you kind of took Evan Stewart probably out of what he does best at times with Dante Moore coming in, a wide receiver that can access the boundary and push the ball vertically down the field, I believe at a higher level than Dylan Gabriel. I think you have a chance to see Evan Stewart become the wide receiver that we remember him being as a true freshman at Texas A&M. Number 2, Decorian Moore. I think he's probably going to be the wide receiver 2 in this room. I think arguably could be the wide receiver 1. I mean, we saw guys like Jeremiah Smith and guys like Ryan Williams come in as freshmen and be dudes. I think Decorian Moore is very, very similar to guys like Ryan Williams or to a guy like Brian Wesco or TJ Moore. I think he's a wide receiver that is ready to come in and be an all Big Ten caliber guy as a freshman. I don't know if I'd put him on that Jeremiah Smith shelf. I think Jeremiah Smith is probably sitting on that shelf alone, but I think Decorian Moore has all the potential in the world to be a wide receiver 1 as a true freshman. We've heard all of those things from him coming out of spring practice. He's a 10-5 guy in the 100-meter dash. He has elite ball skills, elite yards after the catch ability. And then the conversation is, all right, what's the rest of this wide receiver room look like? You know, I think you have one of, if not the best tight ends in the country in Kenyon Sadiq. So you got Evan Stewart, Decorian Moore, Kenyon Sadiq as probably your 3 top pass catchers on this Oregon offense. Who's going to be that wide receiver 3? It could be 5-star Jurion Dickey. It could be a guy like Gary Bryant, who is finally back healthy. It could be a guy like Jeremiah McClellan, who Oregon flipped late in the process from Ohio State. Dylan Gresham, Justice Lowe. This is the reason I'm giving Oregon the nod over USC. The depth in this room is absolutely silly. I think you could argue that next to Ohio State, it could be one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country. So I'm giving Oregon the nod at number 2. And then we'll go to USC at number 3. And USC, that wide receiver duo between Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon, probably the most underrated wide receiver duo in the country. I have them as my number 2 wide receiver duo in the country going into the 2025 year. Now, the conversation for USC is, who are the other guys in this room that we like and that we trust? You're bringing Utah wide receiver Zach Williams, who really generated a ton of buzz during his spring practice at Utah going into year 2. He hits the transfer portal, like really quietly comes to USC. This is a guy that as a true freshman, you didn't hear much about him early, but towards the back half of 2024 as a true freshman, like kind of emerged as one of the better pass catchers in that Utah offense, a Utah offense that couldn't throw the football worth a darn. 2024 year. Zach Williams has a very good chance to be that wide receiver 3, blocks on the perimeter at an extremely high level. Then it's, all right, Jay Fair, maybe true freshman Corey Sims, maybe year 2 Xavier Jordan. You have some intriguing names in this room. I'm just not sure if you have that, the depth that Oregon has in the wide receiver room, and that's why you go USC at number 3. Number 4, and this might be my hottest take here, I'm going to go with Nebraska. The Matt Rule has done a really good job saying, hey, we got a difference maker in Dylan Raiola at the quarterback position. We got to do everything we can to surround him with difference makers on the outside and be able to maximize what this kid can be as a passer, as a guy that can push the football down the field. In the 2024 year, the wide receiver room was solid. You look at Dylan's numbers, like there were a lot of interceptions that show up in the box score for Dylan that probably had a little bit to do with the wide receivers not going out and making plays for him. When you have a quarterback that wants to make high-level throws, you have to have wide receivers that can make high-level catches. And in 2024, again, it wasn't horrible for Nebraska. I thought it was a very solid wide receiver room, but I don't think it was great. I think it could be great in 2025 getting into the guys that they brought in. Dan Key, number one. I think he's a guy that can go for 1,000 yards in this Nebraska offense. And I think more importantly, he fits extremely well what Dylan wants to do as a quarterback, which is push the ball vertically down the field, which you didn't see enough of in the 2024 year. Nebraska Hunter is a young wide receiver coming from Cal that I think checks a lot of boxes. Do I think he's going to be a top 32 NFL draft pick? No. Do I think he can be a very solid wide receiver too, especially in the Big Ten? Yes, absolutely. And then Ja'Cory Barney. I called Nebraska Hunter wide receiver too. I think that's probably going to be Ja'Cory Barney working out of the slot. One of the biggest difference makers in this conference with the football in his hands. And he's South Florida speed, South Florida playmaking ability coming from down in the state of Florida. He's a guy that Nebraska went out of their way to get involved as a true freshman. I think the biggest thing you're looking for from Ja'Cory Barney is, can you be more than just a difference maker with the football in your hands? It was a guy that very limited route tree during his freshman year. A lot of screens, a lot of end arounds, a lot of quick stuff. Can you become a guy that can work vertically down the field? Can you become a guy that can work the middle of the field a little bit more effectively? All of these things that you kind of feel like Ja'Cory Barney is trending to be in 2025. If you get that from Ja'Cory Barney, if you get more than just a difference maker in space, he's going to be one of the better wide receivers in this conference and the 2025 year. Then you add a couple of true freshmen that I think are going to play, most notably Cortez Mills, another Florida kid that was committed to Oklahoma, flips to Nebraska, elite ball skills when the football is in the air. He's not necessarily the biggest, but his coordination, his feel for going up and making plays, it's certainly there. Nebraska needs more of that going into 2025. Number 5, I'm going to go with Indiana. Now, this was between a couple of different schools or a couple of different programs, you might say. I'm giving Indiana the nod because I know you got a wide receiver duo that I love, and Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper. I think Elijah Surratt's one of the best wide receivers in this conference. I mean, he's a guy that caught for over 900 yards, averaged 18.1 yards per catch, one of the best contested catchers that you see in this conference, and quite frankly, that you see in this country. And then you have Omar Cooper, who's a guy that averaged 21 yards per catch. He can do it with the football in his hands. He can do it working vertically down the field. Now, the reason I have them at 5 and maybe not a little bit higher is not really sure what the rest of this wide receiver room is going to be. But when you have two guys that would be wide receiver ones on a lot of other programs across the country, you have to give Indiana the nod at number 5. I think Washington has a very good argument with guys like Denzel Boston and Amari Evans. I think Penn State has a really good argument with guys like Trebor Payne coming into the spring. These are my 5 best wide receiver rooms that you see going into 2025. A lot of good wide receivers in this conference. Like the landscape of the Big Ten just feels and looks a little bit different when you have programs like Oregon, like USC, like Washington joining this conference. Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.